it's Lee from colouringqueen.net and I hope you're having a great day today. Today I am back colouring Alice in Wonderland and it's again from Mrs Peggotty Arts. I've gone to town with that shop and bought quite a few images from there. I won't be able to colour all of them this month for Alice's colour along, but I have managed to colour a couple, and I am again using Xpress blended card with my Copic markers. So today is just a short story and I thought we would follow the Alice in Wonderland theme, and this time it's the Drink Me bottle, or maybe it's not a bottle. So throughout history, and as we all know, the last couple of years, there's been a number of epidemics, many of which have been influenza related. Out of the 25 odd epidemics, there have been 8, I think, that are related to influenza. But back in 1918 and particularly 1919, influenza really took the world by storm, and it resulted in estimated between 20 to 50 million deaths being attributed to influenza, which is really mind-boggling when you consider that 40 million people died in the Great War, or World War One, from 1914 to 1918, just prior to that. So that is a huge amount of people. And during this great pandemic, no one was safe. It struck both the old and the young alike. It didn't have a target of like the elderly or over 60 like some epidemics previously. And people, they certainly didn't want to be struck down by the influenza virus going around, and they would pretty well do anything to try and combat the virus or lessen their chances of catching it. Now, the Carbolic Smoke Ball Company, they've seen a bit of an opportunity to market a product aimed at people worried about the influenza virus, and they came up with what they thought was a pretty clever marketing strategy. They took out a full-page ad in a number of newspapers of the time. Remember newspapers? Does anyone still read them or get them? I read all my stuff online. But back then, newspapers were the way that we got news. There was no internet back then. And so they took out these ads promoting a product that they had, which they claimed was a remedy for influenza. And the remedy was a carbolic smoke ball. Not only could it cure influenza, they claimed, but also other ailments as well, like hay fever, headache, whooping cough, and even snoring, among other things. And it was basically a rubber ball and had a tube attached to it. This was then filled with carbolic acid or phenol, and then you would put the tube up your nose and squeeze the rubber ball, which would release vapours into your nose. And this would basically result in a runny nose, like you get when you use nasal sprays nowadays. And it was the belief that this would flush out the virus from your system if you had it. Now, the smoke balls could last an entire family several months, and they could be refilled as well, making a useful remedy that the whole family could benefit from for a variety of ailments. So their marketing strategy was not only to tell everyone about their remedy, but they put their money where their mouth was and promised in their ads that they would give out £100 as a reward for anyone who actually caught influenza or any other disease caught like by a cold if they used their smoke ball as instructed. Now, the instructions were to use it 3 times a day for 2 weeks, and £100 back then in 1919, it'd be worth just shy of, or just over, depending on the exchange rate, about £5,500 in today's money. So nothing to sneeze at. So, to ensure the veracity and sincerity of their claims that this product would work, if used as directed, they deposited not just £100 reward, but actually £1,000, enough to give out 10 rewards, and they popped this money in the Alliance Bank in Regent Street in England. So Louisa Carlyle, she saw the ad in the paper and she thought, hey, I'll buy one of the balls for myself, and probably her husband as well. So she followed the instructions, she used the ball 3 times a day, and instead of using it for 2 weeks, she used that ball for 2 whole months. And it was then that she caught influenza on the 17th of January in 1892. So her and her husband wrote to the Carbolic Company, and back then women really didn't write letters on their own for business reasons. Their husband usually was involved if they were married. So they wrote to the company claiming the reward, and they didn't hear anything back. So they wrote again, and silence, nothing. So not giving up, because £100 was a huge amount of money back then, they engaged a solicitor. And the solicitor, he tried and wrote to the company again for a 3rd time. Now, instead of receiving back a proper letter, usually from a solicitor for the company, or at least someone that's a director or in charge, they received a letter back that was basically unsigned, stating that the company needed to protect themselves from fraudulent claims, and in order to claim the reward, they were now saying that Louisa would need to pop over to their office each day and use the ball and be checked by a secretary as to how she was using the ball. Now, this was never in the advertisement, so they were basically adding new terms and conditions to claim the reward that had never been mentioned prior to that. So Louisa, through her solicitor, declined to do this, and she sued the company. Now, Louisa's case was that this was a contract between her and the company, and she'd followed the terms of the contract, like using it 3 times a day for 2 weeks at least, and they hadn't fulfilled their part of the bargain. Now, a lot of people think that contracts need to be in writing between each other and, fancy things need to be done, and that's not always the case. Most people enter into numerous contracts each day, like when you go and buy a coffee, there's no written contract there. When you go and, buy a train ticket or a bus ticket or any of the things that you do throughout the day, you're entering into multiple contracts, but you don't really sort of clock it as a contract, because most people think of contracts as something really fancy, but most contracts aren't, and only some contracts really need to be in writing. Now, the company argued that this wasn't a contract at all. This is what's called a puff, and it's not intended to be taken seriously. It's like when you see a shop and it claims that it's got the best chips in the universe. Well, it can't have the best chips in the universe, can it? Because we don't know what the universe is. So it's just a puff, a marketing or advertising strategy. And that's what they said that this reward was. So no £100 for Louisa. But it went to court and the court disagreed. They said that this wasn't a puff, basically because the company had shown it was serious about the reward by depositing the money with the Alliance Bank and stating that in their advertisement. So the smokeball company then tried an alternative argument that there was no contract because the elements of contract law hadn't been met. Now, contract law basically requires 6 specific things called elements to be met in order to have a valid contract, and you need all of them. So the first element to be satisfied in contract law is an offer. And they said that an offer hadn't been made to Mrs Carlyle in particular. Their ad was in the paper and it wasn't directed to anyone in particular at all. So they argued that there couldn't be a contract because an offerer wasn't identified. Now, the court said this wasn't the case. You could actually have an offer to the whole world, or in this case, anyone that read the ad in the paper and took them up on the offer, i.e. performed the terms and conditions in the offer by using it 3 times a day for 2 weeks. The court said if anyone like Louisa could come forward and accept the contract, which is the second element of contract law. So the smoke ball company really didn't want to lose this money, so they tried another argument. And this time it was that there was no consideration, which is the third element of contract law. Now, consideration can be a little bit tricky, but it's basically something for something, and usually the something is money, but it doesn't have to be. And the court said that Louisa using the product as directed was consideration. And rather than saying the consideration was purchasing the product in the first place, the court said that her using it as per directed and being inconvenienced by doing that was actually a form of consideration. So, according to the court, third element has been met. And then the court found that there was actually a contract between the smoke ball company and Louisa, and she was awarded the £100 reward. And she also found her place in legal history because this case is still current law today, and it is a leading case in contract law. And nowadays in Australia, or at least, I don't know about other countries in the Commonwealth, but we also have other legislation as well that is statutory, like the Trade Practices Act, where we'd also sue the smoke ball company for other things like misleading and deceptive advertising. And the smoke ball company would be in a lot more trouble. So they thought their ad could just be run and they really didn't have to pay it out. But this whole court case really proved them wrong on that you don't need to name someone, you don't need to say, hey, this offer is to Louisa. It could be an offer to anybody who accepts it. So after the case, many people thought that the smoke ball company would be just overwhelmed with people trying to claim the £100 reward. But in fact, only 3 people ended up claiming it. And the company was worried a bit though, and after the case they formed a new company with limited liability to protect them against this onslaught of claims, but that never eventuated. But not deterred by their previous ads and being sued, they actually sort of reversed the situation and turned it all on their head. And they put out a new ad, would you believe it, offering a £200 reward this time, and they used the court case to their benefit by proudly telling readers that only 3 people had claimed the reward, and therefore it was implied that it must be super good and work, or otherwise more people would claim the reward. This time though, they did tack on a few extra conditions into the fine print, and they limited the period that you could make a claim to 3 months. Anyway, the company ended up going downhill. They changed management and directors and new people took over, and then it was wound up with the previous owner dying a few years later. And what happened to Louisa Carlyle? Well, she lived to the ripe old age of 96, and she ended up passing away in 1942 from... Come on, you know the answer. You know it. It's on the tip of your tongue. You guessed it. Louisa Carlyle died of influenza. So, I guess it's not really related to the Drink Me bottle in Alice, but it was the closest I could find to something that had a bit of an Alice in Wonderland or elements of Alice in Wonderland theory to it, with the Drink Me bottle being a rubber ball instead that you put up your nose. It's really no different from most of the nasal sprays that we use, like with the pump action in those plastic bottles. But anyway, I hope you enjoyed the story today, and I hope you have a good week. And you can see my finished picture here. I did add a little bit of pencil over this one, and yeah, basically that's it for my Alice picture. So that's it from me. I hope you have a good week, and until next time, stay safe and happy colouring.